Calaroga Shark Media.
Hey, I'm Johnny Mac with your daily comedy news. Bert Kresicher thinks podcasting changed the game. Well, podcasting and social media. Bert said, when they kind of clicked, I think people fell in love with comics' voices. I think people got to hear you and know you and feel like they're your friends, and that's why people loved Roseanne Barr and Tim Allen, all of them, because they felt like they knew them. During the pandemic, it saved our lives. I mean, it saved my life, but I think podcasting for comics gives them control over their own narrative of how they want to be represented to their fans. Look at somebody like Theo Von, who's white hot right now. He's always been funny as hell, but if you leave it up to Comedy Central, a lot of Comedy Central digs lately, if you noticed that. A lot of Comedy Central digs lately. But if you leave it up to Comedy Central, they may not get it, and they may edit him weird. But Theo knows how Theo's the funniest, so he sits in front of a camera and just Theo's it for an hour, and people love him to death. I think he gave a lot of people a way to use their own voice. Theo's podcast is very easy on the ears. Kreischer said, I gotta say, Joe Rogan was the one who was like, F everyone hating each other, we can help each other. When I started, everything was an audition to get a development deal, to get a whole deal. Everybody was kind of crappy behind their backs to each other. It was a weird energy of, we're not friends, but we work together. Then when podcasting showed up, Joe started putting people on, and we're like, yo, this is Bert, he's funny, go see him live. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, what? Yo, Ari, do you want to be on my podcast? Everybody cares about each other. We're up front to each other about how much money we make, what the clubs pay. We talk about ad sales on podcasts. It's very different than when I started, and you couldn't get someone to help you get past at the cellar. Speaking of Joe Rogan, the New York Post was speculating that Joe Rogan may ditch Spotify for another platform, perhaps even joining Elon Musk's X, Twitter, after Joe's contract with Spotify expires next year. The Joe Rogan Experience is believed to draw 11 million listeners per episode. Joe reportedly has a $200 million deal. Arete Research founder Richard Kramer told The Verge, it's a situation where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. If you do keep Joe Rogan, Spotify will be locked into paying Rogan as much or even more than before at a time when they need to contain costs. But if you don't keep him, that's really tough because your biggest property and source of sales within the ad business walks. Ashley Carmen wrote about Joe Rogan for Bloomberg. She reports Joe Rogan's appearance at a Spotify advertiser event in Austin recently suggests he's going to stay with Spotify. According to people familiar with the event, reports Bloomberg, Spotify flew podcast ad agencies and brand reps out to Texas for a full day of corporate-sponsored fun. They were wine and dined. They went to the Grand Prix alongside Dax Shepard, who schmoozed with guests for about 40 minutes. Later, the group ate in Cahoots, a private event space where Joe Rogan joined in. Joe hung out for 45 minutes circulating the room, saying hi and taking photos with attendees. So we'll see if Rogan stays. I had promised you, if you don't listen on the weekend, I had promised on Friday I would talk about the Grammys on Monday, and today's Monday. I actually did it on Saturday. Normally I do the weekends in advance, but I hadn't recorded Saturday, and the news broke, and I was excited about it. So if you want to hear the Grammy discussion, that's the beginning of Saturday's podcast, which was really, 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 really robust for a weekend episode. The nominees for Best Comedy Album are Trevor Noah, I Wish You Would, Wanda Sykes, I'm an Entertainer, Chris Rock, Selective Outrage, Sarah Silverman, Someone You Love, Dave Chappelle, What's in a Name. Again, if you want to hear my analysis of that, go back to Saturday's episode. Whitney Cummings has her OnlyFans special out this week. And yes, I was on OnlyFans earlier, researching comedy like I normally do. Oh, you don't believe me? Here, listen.
I am 7 months pregnant. If I had got pregnant even a year earlier, I would have sold the baby for Taylor Swift tickets. I live in LA, so I get an invite to a gender reveal party every month for the same kid.
Special sounds like it's pretty funny. It is Whitney's 6th special. It's called Mouthy. It's her first for OFTV, and it's free on OnlyFans TV November 15th. Whitney recently spoke to Yahoo about the evolution of her comedy and said your comedy should be concurrent with your evolution as a person. The idea is you're the same person on stage as you are off stage, so hopefully you're not doing the same kind of stuff 20 years later, because I'll look back sometimes in my first or second special and I'll cringe a little bit. I'm like, you know what? That's who I was at that time, and that's okay. I also loved how Rodney Dangerfield gave the audience a joke to go home with. You could go home and the next day tell a joke at the water cooler. I always want to make sure within my act there are a couple jokes you can easily repeat the next day at work and be the funny person. Like, I saw this person, this comic last night. Here's this joke. And you get to make everybody laugh. There's so many, even if they're not comics, there's so many memes. There's so many little one-liners. People send memes to each other every day and they send these tweets. So now I'm going to go a little more conversational. Now I'm going to tell these stories that no one else can tell. I'm going to get more specific. I'm going to get more personal. In case you're curious, I wound up seeing the Beach Boys on Saturday night. I was going back and forth. Should I see Jimmy Carr down in Philly or the Beach Boys right by my house? And around 5 o'clock, a ticket popped up, and it was in row J. So I had a really nice seat for the Beach Boys. I'm a huge Beach Boys fan. Mike Love is 82, and I'm like, you should probably go see him. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, know what I mean? I'd made a similar decision to go see Jimmy Buffett back in 2022, and I'm glad I did. Mike sounded pretty good. I saw the Mike Love Beach Boys, I don't know, pre-pandemic. It might be 10 years now, and Mike was starting to sound a little Kermit, but he was in good form on Saturday night, so I enjoyed that. Oh, and people are asking me how old the crowd was. Older than old. Your parents were there. I don't know how old you are, but it was your parents. It was George Costanza's parents. It was every old person stereotype, senior citizens knocking people over, didn't care. But I had a really good time. Also on Saturday Night Live. And Ron DeSantis now being played by Please Don't Destroy's John Higgins. James Austin Johnson, as Trump points out that SNL thinks so little of DeSantis' candidacy that they're not even going to commit a genuine cast member to play him. An okay enough episode. Timothy Chalamet. In one sketch, a woman complained to her doctor, played by Bowen Yang, that she's been seeing a mysterious figure in her sleep every night. The doctor uses a new therapy to conjure the image while the woman is awake. Timothy Chalamet appears in a white tank top, baggy blue pants, and wavy blonde hair and says, I'm Australian YouTube twink turned indie pop star and model turned HBO actor Troye Sivan, being played by an American actor who can't do an Australian accent. The woman asks, isn't he kind of famous? And Bowen Yang says, he's gay famous. It's different. The Simpsons have responded to the notion that Homer has stopped choking Bart Simpson. Matt Groening has a doodle. The image features Bart holding up a phone that says, Simpsons, no more strangling. Homer strangles him and says, why, you little clickbaiting? The producers also included a note that said Homer Simpson was unavailable for comment. He was busy strangling Bart. The 900-pound gorilla was catching a bunch of shows at the New York Comedy Festival. Some really, really, really enthusiastic writing to the point where I was like, all right, who wrote this? Well, who wrote it was Eric Farwell. Eric is a freelance journalist who's been covering comedy since 2015 with pieces in The Atlantic and Vanity Fair. So, okay, this isn't somebody who just woke out of bed and went, let me write flowing things about comedy. So I'll take this as a respected opinion. Eric Farwell writes, Eagle Wit ran a long set that proved just how great he is. Bad writing here would be to tell you he's like Michael Che or Sam Jay or 90s 2000 Chappelle or Chris Rock, because really, Eagle Wit is his own frequency of comedian engaging with cultural topics. Sure, he has truly brilliant jokes that can seem edgy and is also inviting intimacy and honesty in his work. Wit isn't trying to position himself as the person who has all the answers, but somebody who wants to. Paris Sachet was next. There's a contest to see who New York's funniest comedian is, and if that's the only metric we're going for, Paris should win. High praise there. Not only did she run material she'd never performed before, she made it look effortless and crushed so hard, the writer says I lost my breath laughing. She told one joke so dirty, I'm not going to share it with you. The confidence and absolute perfection of Sachet's language and structure made her time an unforgettable 10 minutes. Eric Farwell writes, if you're very, very, very lucky, you'll see Brittany Carney perform stand-up one day. There's no one who can match her ability to be funny, interesting, and illustrative on stage. Most of stand-up is a version of the truth, but Carney has such a distinct voice and place she's operating from that it feels like a one-to-one of actual experience to joke on stage. Her interest is history, language, and zoology, allowing her to weld academic panache, sweet nerdiness, and jokes so good it borders on sacrilegious. Wow. For example, she has a bit about dating, records, and the tempo of steel drum music that has a punchline that refers to her date as a pigeon of a man. Farwell writes, Jay Jordan was undeniable in his set. Jordan has this great syncopated delivery as a joke continues, making a meal out of the end vowels without it impacting the rhythm. It's so good that it becomes intuitive after his sets, the way earworms convince you this one song is the epitome of music. He's getting too big for one borough, meaning Brooklyn, and his getting ahead can only be good for comedy. And then Gary Gulman took the stage. Sitting in the back, comics gathered behind me, writes Farwell, to watch, as I've always known comics to do with Gulman. Yeah, that's side praise when the comics watch the other comics. Gulman is free on stage, not because he doesn't care, but because he cares so much that he's taken the time to learn how to harness into something close to perfect. The crowd laughed at jokes about the intellectual anxiety at an Oppenheimer screening, Harlem, and Jesus workshopping his speeches. What they heard was pure poetry. The LA Times did a lengthy, very interesting interview with Mo Amer. Mo is Palestinian. They discussed the current conflict. Mo Amer said the sad part is the fundamental issues have not changed. It's not the first time Gaza has been under bombardment. It's not the first time the West Bank is experiencing this kind of settler violence. It's all elevated and heightened, of course. But it's not anything new, so it doesn't shift the perspective on the show. meaning his wonderful television show Mo, as much as you would think. It just puts the pressure on us to make sure that we execute it to the best of our ability and we amplify the humanity of it all. We're all realizing how incredibly important this show is. The fact that it's literally the only TV show with a Palestinian family and a Palestinian lead co-creator at the head. Mo created the show with comedian Rami Youssef. Makes it super important to do this story justice. It's an amazing opportunity to humanize and to create more understanding and to give people a point of reference. All right, will the current situation be acknowledged on season 2 of Mo? Mo said, clearly what happened on October 7th is a tragedy. Any loss of civilian life is a tragedy, period. And while there's no way to move forward and build a story without acknowledging what's happening in the world, it's also impossible to know how things will unfold. I mean, what's the world going to look like in a year when the show drops? We can't tell the future, but we can speak about the 75 years that has built up to where we are now, and we'll definitely be examining Israeli-Palestinian relationships through our characters. The LA Times asked Mo Amer on a personal level, how are you holding up? Mo said, it's been a whole month now, and it's excruciating. Every day I wake up with a sick feeling in my stomach, but also with gratitude for what I have. I have an immense amount of worry for my people back home. I'm worried about what this will all escalate into because it seems like there's no end to the violence and the bombardment. Not only in Gaza, there's been a lot of extremist settler violence in the West Bank. They're armed and taking over towns. I'm deeply concerned about that too. The LA Times said there's that old adage that trauma is the bedrock of great comedy. Mo said that all Palestinians should be hilarious. How about a ceasefire so we could turn in some scripts? Hollywood is waiting. We'll make sure to get some good zingers in there too. Mo's comedy is fantastic. Mo is a good show. That one's on Netflix, doing that off the top of my head. Very good show. A new comedy vertical is coming to streaming platform Veeps, featuring new specials from David Cross, Brad Williams, Catherine Ryan, and Reggie Watts. Not bad. Veeps will also be the streaming home for sets from Sketchfest 2024. The upcoming specials are David Cross, Worst Daddy in the World, November 27th, Brad Williams, Starfish on December 21st, Catherine Ryan, Mrs., November 17th, and Reggie Watts in 2024, and Blair Sochi, live from the Big Dog, December 1st. John Cleese has been out and about a lot lately. He was talking about Monty Python's Flying Circus and said the BBC just let us get on with it because it was so cheap and it went out so late. Except when they were putting out the Horse of the Year show instead, which they did quite a lot at the start. They didn't bother to watch it, so there was no supervision. And it wasn't because they were enlightened, it's because we weren't important. Cleese is pushing back on a report that had said the new stage version of Monty Python's Life of Brian would not include the famous scene where Stan, a member of the People's Front of Judea, declares that he wants to be a woman and have babies. At a live show, Cleese had mentioned in the audience that at a reading of the script in New York, the actors had objected to the scene on the grounds that it was transphobic. But Cleese said, but I never said I was taken out of the show, and suddenly there were debates on TV about it. He then told a story from 1966 about writers not checking facts. He said, I remember being interviewed by The Observer in 66, and the writer had said that my father had been in the church, which is terribly funny and quite incorrect, but she'd misread her own notes. In the church apparently looks very close to in insurance. She apologized and said it didn't matter. If in case you're curious why John Cleese doesn't retire, he says the genuine reason is financial. After his third divorce, the settlement was $20 million. John said, I'd like to buy a place in the sun before I die, or at least a place in the sun where I could be buried. There are a whole lot of things I'd like to be doing, reading, writing, and thinking about, and you can't really do it when you're busy doing interviews to sell tickets. And that's your comedy news for today. If you like the show, why don't you tell somebody about it? They might like it too. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Know what I mean? Say no more. Follow the show for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast Podcasts. See you tomorrow.